Welcome to Cheshire Corners. I'm Sebastian Coco, and I'll be your host as we trip through the looking glass. Thanks for joining us back on Psychospotlight, which is our series where we put a more specific focus on individuals within the psychedelics industry. Today I'm joined by Lakshmi Narayan, who is a pioneer in the world of psychedelic media and is the founder and CEO of Awake Media, as well as FEAT, the Fund for Entheogenic Addiction Treatment, which, as I said, is the pioneering media firm that kind of handles a lot of psychedelic companies that work today. So welcome, Lakshmi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Sebastian. Thank you so much for having me. So that's actually Awake.net is a nonprofit, and FEAT is the program inside of Awake.net. Thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
No, yeah, absolutely. So we just talked about some of your professional accomplishments. Let's focus more on you specifically. Can you tell us a little bit more about your personal history as a psychonaut, kind of how it all began, and then how you decided to shift your professional career towards, exactly that, psychonautics and kind of the discovery of your own consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sebastian. So, basically, I encountered ayahuasca in 1996 when I went on a trip to Peru. I didn't know anything about plant medicines or psychedelics. I went to go to the Amazon rainforest and to Machu Picchu. And when I was in the rainforest in Iquitos, ayahuasca came into my life, literally unbidden. So I did a journey with ayahuasca during that trip, and it completely transformed my life because I saw an image of my dead father, or the spirit of him, you could say, and we communicated across time and space, and he had died 5 years before, and it awakened. I had a massive awakening. I was literally like high for 3 days afterwards while I was in Peru in Machu Picchu. It was really like life-changing for me. So at that point, I came back, and I was literally, from that day on, I've been a evangelist, I would say, for psychedelics. So during that time, I was working as a designer. I had my own company, and I was working for healthcare marketing and financial companies, and I was doing work for corporate America. And through a series of events, I got disenchanted with healthcare, and I didn't want to market that anymore. As I began to see the power of psychedelic medicines to heal my own traumas and ills, and make me into a better version of myself. But I also felt like I wanted to help communicate that, particularly when 9/11 happened. So I was watching 9/11 from a friend's kitchen, in a friend's kitchen on his TV, and I didn't have a TV at the time, and watching the Twin Towers fall, and it was like a lightning bolt where I felt like that we as a humanity need to have a spiritual awakening in order to counteract or transform the events that had been set in motion with that, or maybe even before that. There's all kinds of stories, but anyway, that event was, such a landmark for everybody. But so I decided I was going to devote myself to creating media that awakens. And I didn't really know what that looked like. I didn't have a name or anything, but really that was the genesis of using the word awake. And Awake Media and Awake.net was because I still feel that way. Events have only reinforced that feeling that we're like a series of warring tribes right now, particularly. And if we want to wake up, we have to evolve our consciousness, and psychedelics, or entheogens, like I like to call them, are the agents for that transformation.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, on kind of the note of using media to help transform the world, open minds up to psychedelics, that's I totally get it. That's exactly what we're trying to do here at Cheshire Corners. With some of the scripted content, especially when it comes to like the research that I'm doing, it's all about demystifying, and it's about showing people like, hey, this is not some crazy hippie tool or some, devil chemical, or it's just something that lets you see your own consciousness for what it is.
In terms of the sequence of it, I started Awake Media in 2012, and I started to shift my efforts from mainstream healthcare into psychedelics. It was kind of fringe at the time. I lived in Ben Lomond, and MAPS was a tiny little office in Ben Lomond in the 1990s, late 1990s. And then I worked on the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference brand in 2013. And I worked on a few other websites for people who were doing something, Synergetic Press. I worked on something called the Timothy Leary Strip Through Time, and a few other things. And then somebody at MAPS referred me to Martin Polanco, who was the owner of a clinic called Crossroads Ibogaine in Tijuana. And he invited me to work on his brand and website, and also invited me to do an Ibogaine journey. The Ibogaine journey was literally after like 20 years of psychedelic journeying with all kinds of other medicines, but I had never done Ibogaine. And it was the most powerful psychedelic journey I have had, and I've had a lot of pretty powerful journeys, so that's really saying a lot. But it was also the most grounding one. It rooted me. And it's literally a root. It's, the iboga, it's the root. The ibogaine comes from the root bark. And so there's something holographic about that idea of rooting that iboga carries with it, I would say. And so ibogaine, when I did the journey, they had just diagnosed me with diabetes 2, just literally with the blood test that we take for ibogaine. Ibogaine is a really powerful medicine, and it has serious physiological effects, good and can be risky if you don't make sure you have the right cardiac and other health conditions for it. So people are very careful with it. And they take blood panel tests, and they took a blood panel test, and they said, well, if you were in a clinic, in a doctor's office, they'd tell you had diabetes 2. So I went in having just found out that I had diabetes 2, and my father had died of diabetic neuropathy. So when I took the Ibogaine, it literally interrupted my addiction to sugar and took me on a visual psycho-spiritual journey through the DNA code, and showed me how easy it was to actually implement an idea called epigenetics, which is this idea that your genetic code doesn't express, it's a code, but in order for it to express, something else has to be activated chemically or in your consciousness, and that, so you can actually affect the expression of your code by this consciousness, by your consciousness. And that's what it kept showing me, that I could just kick out the code. But what the medicine was doing while that was happening on a physiological level, was taking away my addiction to sugar. So when I got out of it, I was able to I stopped eating all carbs, all forms of sugar, went on a juice fast, like a green juice diet, and I dropped 30 pounds, and I was able to reverse the diabetes too, and to this day I control it with diet, and I don't take any medication.
No, that's
I just don't
really,
eat
really
sugar.
awesome.
No.
Yeah,
It was so powerful, because nobody thinks of sugar, but it surely is one of the killers that is causing so many people to have diabetes. So I came out of it, and I thought, wow, I'm going to tell the world about this, and I started a documentary, Iboga Saves, which I'm still making, but COVID came along, and I also ran into this thing where people would say to me, I would love to do Ibogaine, but I just can't afford the treatment, because Ibogaine is a Schedule 1, and there's no clinics here. You have to go to someplace in Mexico or elsewhere. and so it costs a lot of money, and it's an expensive treatment in itself, about $8,000 to $10,000. And so I started Awake.net Feet at that point as the fund for entheogenic addiction treatment.
Gotcha.
Kind of felt like, what's the point of making a movie about something that nobody can access? So
no, that's totally fair, and I really respect, because I've, like, from a producer standpoint, I really respect the, well, I want to make a film about this, but it's kind of impossible, so let's make it happen, you know, more solidly, so that way we can actually have some more experiences to film. So, like, I respect that immensely, just like producer to producer, first and foremost. I thought your point on epigenetics was very interesting, and because I actually, like, I went to school at least a little bit for neuroscience and chemistry. I took a bunch of classes in those kinds of things. Didn't finish out the degree, but I'm, like, pretty familiar with epigenetics and kind of neural chemistry, kind of how all that works. I think it's super interesting, something I've never thought of before. Kind of the theory that the rush of serotonin, or even the actual psychedelic chemical itself entering your brain, could trigger some sort of epigenetic change that actually, because studies have shown that, like, even our memories are encoded basically in cells that are manipulated by DNA and genetics. Like, they're called engram cells, like, and that's something that I did a paper or two on it for school. So I think that's a super interesting theory. And I also think it requires so much money to properly research. But I think there's something that's really to that. The thought that there are some genetic shifts happening due to a chemical change in our minds, because that's the whole, the brain is kind of the arena where chemistry and physiology and even physics kind of all blend together. So I think that's a super interesting theory, and we could have a whole hour-long discussion on just that.
I know.
I also
that's for sure.
To your point on sugar too, something that I think we talked about, like, in our call, because you mentioned that as well, your diabetes and the sugar thing. It's something that I wanted to mention on camera, like, for the audience, because it's super important. Scientifically speaking, sugar has been ranked, like, I believe, I don't have a source to, like, flash on screen and back this one up, but I believe it's, like, the most addictive chemical, if not really up there, and it competes with nicotine and cocaine, you know, like, it's just from the normalization from a societal standpoint, because it's in our diets and because of how that's, you know, consumed by a heavily commercialized market, that it's a super normalized addictive chemical, and there's a lot of people, myself included, that are addicted to sugar. Like, and and I don't say that with shame. I don't say that with, like, I'm going to necessarily seek out addiction treatment today, even though I know I should eat less sugar. It's more of part of it is just being aware that these chemicals, even if they're very commonplace, have a huge impact in our lives. Same thing with caffeine. Like, it's not just your parents or whatever kind of annoying you by saying, oh, you'll stunt your growth by drinking all those energy drinks. Like, caffeine is a very powerful drug that's just available over the counter.
Right. Well, you know, everything that we eat and everything we consume, and some things we don't consume, alters our body chemistry, right? Mm-hmm. We literally are these alchemical, I don't know what you would call us. Your body is an alchemical factory. Your factory is too mundane a word for what it is, but
it's
that's what's happening.
It's a convergence of millions of different synthetic processes all happening at once to combine and form the chemical miracle that is the human brain and the human body walking and talking and thinking and feeling. Like, it is, I totally agree with you. Like, it is, to anything that we put in our body, period, affects the whole thing from top to bottom.
And sugar has been, sugar has been it's accepted. People give sugar to kids right from when they're little. Candy is such a big thing, and you get addicted to candy. I remember dreaming about owning candy stores when I was a kid. So maybe people who get diabetic tend to be more addicted. It's possible. I used to put 3 spoons of sugar in my coffee, so there might be a tendency. So I don't really know about that, but I do know that it's the most accepted one, but it's also the one that creates the most illness, because the onset of childhood onset diabetes is really increased. It's huge now. So anyway, but I felt like that itself was too soft an issue for me to be able to get behind Ibogaine, and that people were dying. The 100,000 overdose deaths in 2022, it's a much more alarming figure, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try to bring out the value of Ibogaine for that, and so that's what we're doing with the FEED grant. And we want to bring together our first cohort of FEED applicants who are going through this program, and it's a 9-month program called Change Your Character, and it includes crowdfunding, treatment, Ibogaine treatment, some guidance or access to resources so they can select an Ibogaine clinic, and then a 9-month integration program called Change Your Character. And our goal is, it's called 10,000 rebirths, and that's what we want to achieve, is 10,000 rebirths to start to shift that death toll a little bit.
So talk to me a little bit more about how FEED works, kind of the actual, scheduling process, how people are placed and, go from point A to point, I shouldn't even say point A to point B, obviously they drive to a clinic or whatever, but basically how people are picked, how cases are made, how treatment centers are chosen, kind of the whole thing, because I think that'd be something people would be really interested to know about, like of your whole vetting process. And I also want to know if you guys have thought about or considered any other treatments for addiction, like psychedelic treatments. Obviously, LSD isn't legal anywhere, and this is a tricky one, but studies have shown, like from the 1970s to now, that LSD is a really big and good treater for alcoholism specifically. So yeah, no, that's and in my mind, one of the kind of challenges with psychedelic therapy is matching the substance to the issue. So I didn't know if you guys had anything else to say on that, but I also want to know, that's really 2 questions in one, because I also want to know more about the FEED system and kind of how you're picking individuals and placing them in programs.
Well, we're just piloting our first cohort of 12 students. So to date, I've taken one person through it, another person halfway through it who dropped out, and a third person who's coming on next month. So, we're still literally piloting how to run the program. And the reason for that is because there are so many barriers to actually getting access to Ibogaine and Iboga. And so Ibogaine works. It interrupts some of the hardest addictions out there reliably in a single treatment. And so that's kind of why I decided to get behind Ibogaine, is because it works. And it's really, I know that ayahuasca can work, and I know you're just telling me that LSD can work. And I quit smoking cigarettes with psilocybin. So I know that these things can work for pretty tough addictions, but the fentanyl thing and the overdose thing and some of the medications for it, which are also addictive, like Suboxone and methadone, are much tougher to crack. And so, it's hard to get behind. So I decided to get behind Iboga because that's what inspired me. And I think along the way, other modalities might become a part of what is available on Awake, because that's what I'm building as a community of providers.
Yeah.
But I'm not specifically going after those solutions. It's hard enough going after Ibogaine and trying to make it viable.
No, that totally makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the challenges that you face specifically with Ibogaine? Obviously, there's a lot of kind of legal hoops to jump through. So I'd love to know more about that process.
Sure. So Ibogaine or Iboga tabernathi, as it's called, that's the name of the plant from which it comes. Ibogaine can also be extracted from another plant called wakanga, and Ibogaine is a white. It's found in the root bark of the Iboga tree, and I think it's found in other parts of the wakanga plant. And Ibogaine HCl is the active alkaloid extract of the Iboga plant, and when it's administered to somebody in a clinical setting, in what's called a flood dose or a certain dosage that's relative to their body weight, etc., it does something in the brain and the body where it resets your body to a pre-addicted state. You could say that that's kind of what the effect. And some people have really big journeys and awakenings, and they go through kind of like it's like a stern grandfather is speaking to them. That's what it's like. Or they'll be shown the beginning of the universe, or shown their own death should they continue to use this, whatever their addiction is. So different kinds of insights and revelations about themselves. They come out of it. Some people don't have that, but a lot of people have this amazing journey, dreamlike slides coming in front of your vision. That's the model that Ibogaine uses, the computer model. So, but you have to, in order to have that treatment, which lasts from 12 hours is the active phase, 12 to 36 hours is some people can have a journey last that long. And then it's often followed by a sleeplessness for a while. But what happens during that is that your body is reset and you come out of it and you do not need to have your fix. And Ibogaine was discovered by this guy named Howard Lotsoff in New York City, and he was a drug addict in his 20s, and somebody gave him Ibogaine, and he thought he was going to party with it, and he took it with some friends, and then the next day he realized that he didn't need heroin, and so he spent the rest of his life trying to make it approved as a medicine in the US, but it's a Schedule I drug. And along with all the other psychedelics, it's a Schedule I. But because Ibogaine is a powerful medicine, obviously, because it can interrupt as powerful a disease as opioid addiction or meth addiction. But it's also it slows down your heart rate or QT interval, and so you have to make sure. You have to have certain medical equipment, have to have a doctor on staff, have to be able to do it with some safety precautions, which makes it very different from other psychedelics. But also, the medicines, it would completely interrupt the current pharmaceutical model of Suboxone and methadone and other rehab, the whole thing, which has a 93% failure rate, that whole system.
Wow, 93%?
So anyway, that's where it's caught. Ibogaine is caught in that, in the psychedelic war on drugs. It's just caught in that same knot. So what has happened is that people have started clinics in Mexico, just over the border in Tijuana, or in further in the interior, Tulum and San Miguel Allende and Tepoztlan. There's clinics all over the place there. And then there are clinics in Portugal and Amsterdam and Africa. And then I think there are some in Canada now. So people go to clinics that are outside of the US. That's kind of the status quo of how it is. So I started FEED and I got the 501c3 as we're using the medical tourism model of sending people out of the country to do Ibogaine. So that's our current thing, and we have a form for you to fill out and ask a lot of questions. And the person who applies for FEAT, they agree to kick off the crowdfunding with a $2,000 donation that they're making to their own healing. So it starts with that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Where they have skin in the game and there's an initiative, because no one else was going to come up with that $2,000 but them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then it actually encourages them to push the crowdfunding campaign as well, and like make some work on that. Yeah. No.
Yeah, exactly.
That totally makes sense.
They have some motivation. And then in addition to that, we're going to raise the rest, so it's about $10,000 by the time you're done with it. So and it pays for the clinic. It pays for some people need to get on short-acting opiates, so it can be more than 10,000, more like 15,000. So the actual budget is going to vary depending on the person and what substance they're addicted to and what needs to happen. It's a learning curve. The whole thing is a learning curve. The people who run these Ibogaine clinics, the ones who have a lot of experience, had to break a lot of rules to do it, and they're like heroes, that they had to find ways of doing something outside of the current system because it could save lives. And I think that reason is completely viable right now, completely the reason. It can save lives now. So how much is a life worth?
No, sure. That's a good question. It's a really good question. I mean, look at the settlement that the Sackler family just reached of, how many billions of lives for how many billions of dollars. It's almost a one-to-one exchange at a certain point. So I'm very much with you of, well, how much is a life worth? How, what is enough kind of thing. But we've got the healing centers open in Oregon for the first time, which is awesome. As I just said, the Sackler family has to repay like a lot of money in a class action settlement for the current opioid crisis. I'm not gonna say we're in a different world. Definitely not. There's still a lot of people that are really suffering, but I'm optimistic, and I think that we're making good strides to the future. And I think that organizations like yours and organizations like FEAT are the only way that we're gonna kind of get over this hump of kind of what you're saying, the 10,000 souls kinds of thing. Like the getting people back on track, and because
we have to turn it around. It's like turning a ship around. Right, we got to turn it around.
No, absolutely, I agree. So in turning it around, it seems like Awake.net and Awake Media are kind of huge tools for that, as far as what you see. And you even kind of said to yourself you saw the psychedelic calling of doing these things like for greater society. So can you tell me, and from what I've seen of them, they're really focused on community, and they're really kind of integrated with each other in kind of Awake.net's, because Awake.net is the kind of social media platform for psychonauts, and then Awake Media being the kind of media development team for psychonautic companies. Can you talk more about how they work hand in hand, and kind of how you're trying to build an awake community kind of thing in order to benefit society?
Sure, thanks for asking. In order to I have this maxim that media creates culture. And my blog on Awake Media is called Media Creates Culture, because at some point I realized that we were all kind of pawns of our current cultural norms and communications and media. And I thought, okay, so basically the reason why only the psychedelics have been so fringe is because they've been demonized by mainstream media for a long time. Not just since the 70s when they all got scheduled, but before that, right from the forbidden fruit, just the idea of actually being able to commune with God or commune with your higher self or higher intelligence or whatever you want to call it, whatever your preferred words are. It's been we have not had access for a long time. So we're a culture who is the product of a society that has not had access. And so I realized that not just me, but a lot of people would need to make media about psychedelics to reframe it differently and to communicate. And so if you go to a media company where they have not had much experience with psychedelics, it's going to be very hard for them to communicate what it is, just because the nature of it, it's such a game changer. Mm-hmm. So that's really what Awake Media is. We know psychedelics, and we are passionate about communicating what's good about them, why it's a benefit to society as a whole, why anyone, even someone in the DEA, should know how fantastic it is, so that they can experience psychedelics and evolve their own consciousness. And I really think that we wouldn't have a mental health epidemic if these medicines had been part of our initiatory culture a long time ago, like they used to be a long time ago. So, what once was can be once again. You just have to recognize that we need new forms, because we're a new, different society than what was ancient. We have a very sophisticated consciousness now.
No, totally. I totally agree. I actually talked about a similar point with Indica Child on the My Psychedelic Process episode that we released relatively recently. So I totally agree. Part of it is fitting to what society is doing now. I wanted to not quite backtrack, but address one thing you said about Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit kind of thing, and
Can you say that again? Sorry, I couldn't hear.
No, totally. I wanted to not quite backtrack, but address really quickly the point that you said about Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit, and kind of the association between all of that, Christianity and the fact that it's forbidden to ascertain a higher self through natural products, right from the get-go, right from Genesis. I thought that was a very, 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 very interesting point. Something I've never thought of or considered before. My big argument for it, and I make this argument in the Brief History of Psychedelics, which is another video that I did, is that the Roman Empire, as it kind of rose to prominence, and as kind of the colonialistic tendencies that still dominate the world that they kind of brought on, as that rose up, because the Roman culture and a lot of the European cultures, they just didn't have as much exposure to psychedelic substances because they're just not as prevalent in Europe, just period, especially when compared to subtropical regions like the Amazon. So considering the substances were not that present in the ecology of the region where that civilization grew to prominence, as they took over kind of the rest of the world, and as the rest of the world has this Roman domination, and then very soon after Roman Catholic domination, so I think it aligns really closely basically with what you're saying. I think it's super interesting you making that point, because I think you're right on the money, and the research that I've done would definitely agree with you too. So yeah, I more just wanted to address it and make those connections, because as soon as you said that, I was like, whoa, that's super cool. I never thought of it that way, but in my opinion, you're totally right.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty obvious, but it didn't happen just in the Roman. Yeah, so just before the Romans, there were the Essenes, and the Essenes went underground, and what they call the Gnostic Gospels went underground, and people think that, and then there are images of psilocybin in lots of churches, and lots of there's in some of their stained glass, etc. So. There's lots of evidence pointing to that. I think we got off track here somehow. No, you were talking about the forbidden fruit and the tree.
The forbidden fruit.
Exactly.
No, that's interesting.
That was the demonization. And if you look at where our culture, and not only was it that demonization, it was also where man and woman were this perfect couple, and then it became the woman was evil because of the pointing to the fruit, and the whole thing created a divide between man and woman that started a long time ago.
That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. You say
I think we're seeing the effects of it now, very much in our culture, in terms of a polarization or a attempt to depolarize, also both and you could say are dangerous for our society, because the family is kind of the thing that keeps the whole thing together.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, whether it's the family you're born with or the family you make because of kind of circumstance, I totally agree. It's family. That's really the most important thing. Did you say Essenes? ESCINES? Is that right?
It sounds like as seen, but I think it's a little pun, but it's Essene. ESSENE. Yeah, the Essene Christians. And I think they went underground right about that time. And I think what happened with plant medicines is that as societies became more rigid and more top-down controlling, the plants went underground.
We're about at time. Let's do the last question. It's kind of like the what's for the future kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. I just think I don't know if I added the last point about the feet thing. So somebody I think I did have to complete that sentence. That when somebody they select a treatment clinic, and during all that time they're doing that, they are part of this program called Change Your Character, which is a 9-month. It's 9 hexagrams for rebirth, and it's based on the I Ching. So interesting, we were talking about the DNA and all of that. Well, the I Ching is literally built on the same math as the DNA. And there are 64 hexagrams and there are 64 codes. So there's some really direct correlation between the I Ching and the DNA. And the other really interesting thing is that the binary system which is basically the foundation of modern computing, was discovered by a guy named Leibniz through his use of the I Ching. So this really ancient book, it's like over 5,000 years old from China, this philosophy, is built on some things that are literally at the forefront of modern science right now. Science and technology.
That's really cool.
Very interesting relationships here. Which is why I want to teach it as a tool, because so while Ibogaine can interrupt addiction, without integration, and what integration is really changing your life. So that you integrate the insights and the glimpses you have of a certain way of being that you got inside Ibogaine, and into your life and into your way of life. Because if you don't do that and you go back to the habits of your old life, you're going to start using again.
Yeah.
So it's very simple. Some people are able to do it without any help, but that's kind of rare. Most of the time, you need to have some support. And so this program is a support group. And we've decided to take people through a cohort, like 12 people at a time. So right now we're looking for 10 other applicants to join us. We have 2 so far. And we'll start in January of 2024, our first 9-month program. So since you're in Colorado, I just want to make a shout out that if anybody's out there who wants to apply for the FEED program, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get that link from you to put it in the description of this video, as well as the link to all of Lakshmi's other kind of websites and everything that she's doing right now with awake.net, Awake Media. So definitely check out the description for all of that. We'll get all that from her after this episode, we wrap it up. But Lakshmi, thank you first and foremost so much for being on the show. But I want to hear more from you quickly about what you think the future of psychedelic media is going to be, and just kind of some of the next steps that you and I, as the creators of psychedelic media, some steps that we should take in order to, give the public the best view that we can.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Sebastian. That's a great question. So in the 60s and the 70s, what people used to depict the psychedelic experience was using the tools that they had, which was like markers and paint and drawing tools, and then everything got shut down. But in the meantime, the way that we make films and what we can do with 3D modeling is just absolutely amazing, and it's really a very developed art form.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the psychedelic experience is best expressed through the medium of film, and that's what's going to happen, and people are going to start telling these stories about how psychedelics heal, because not everyone will take psychedelics, and even the ones who will take it are microdosing. Microdosing is great, but at some point it can only do so much. It's a microdose. And so in order to understand the value of a macrodose, people are going to want to understand what happens. How does healing actually happen? And gosh, can you imagine using 3D tools to depict psychedelic experiences? How fantastic it will be.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's been some, like The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, and Big Mouth, the Netflix cartoon, they actually just on the last series had like a psychedelics episode where they depicted that through animation. And there's like there's a lot of different examples of what you're talking about, and I totally agree that as we kind of move into the future of 3D tools, in-person light and soundscapes as well, there's a lot of cool experimental light and sound art pieces that have gained some prominence lately, as well as like experiential theater, kind of the whole it's the Macbeth, Something Never Sleeps, the experiential theater production of Macbeth that was run in New York City and China, like that kind of in-person, a world moving around you, a narrative moving around you, use of technology. I think that's going to be massive for psychedelic media. I totally agree. Awesome, Lakshmi. Well, thank you so much for coming once again. And yeah, we really appreciate having you here, and we really appreciate everything you're doing for the industry right now. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and have a great evening.
Yeah, you too, of course. And for our subscribers, really quickly before we sign off, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps us out. Definitely check out all of Lakshmi's websites, links. Check out the Feet Fund, especially if you're interested, in the description. And remember, as always, don't get psyched out. All right. Thank you, Lakshmi.